Um, if if life, gives you the feather tickle and you swat it away and it wants to still give you that lesson, it'll hit you with a brick and it'll hurt, but you can keep on moving. And then if you still don't learn the lesson, eventually you get hit with a truck and it is going to take you out until you figure it out. So I was really excited when Kathy came to me and said, hey, tell us more about staff meetings. What are you doing? How have you done it? Because I feel like this was a really good refresher for me as well. So I want to just take this from, an angle of, first off, are you running a staff meeting? And I think that the biggest question that a lot of, or the biggest issue that I see a lot of managers have is they wait to have a staff to start running meetings. The reality is you don't need a staff to run a staff meeting, right? That would be the first thing I think is important for you to know about. When I opened up as a brand new DM, when I transferred to a new location, when I, was a pilot manager, all these different layers and levels of the business I was in, I didn't wait to have a staff to start running the meeting. I ran the meeting first and then got staff to go. Make sense? So if you're sitting here right now and you don't have a staff, that's not an excuse to not run a meeting, right? Like that's rule number one, run the meeting. And here's the deal. I've played around with it for how much time you need for the meeting. And I've found that 90 minutes is approximately a really good, healthy space for me. You might need more, you might need less. I have definitely run staff meetings early in the morning, as early as 7:30. I've run staff meetings as late as, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. I remember one staff meeting, I said, we're not leaving till we're done. And we don't get paid right by the hour. We get paid to get the job done. So we need to get this done. And we had a lot to cover. Now, this was in the summer, a big SC2. We had a lot to plan. So we didn't finish till 11 o'clock, but I found that a good hour and a half, you can get a lot accomplished as long as you're intentional, right? So this whole analogy I want to start with of run the meeting, even if you don't have a staff, you got to think about it with this. And I've learned this, hopefully you can take this with you too. Not running a staff meeting because you don't have staff, right? That's not going to get you growth. One of my quotes that I tell people a lot is that's like looking at a campfire and saying, I'll give you wood when you give me heat. And that analogy kind of wakes you up and it's like, you're not going to win that game. Does that make sense? Obviously you got to give it wood for it to continue to produce heat. So I want you to realize that if you're not running the meeting right now, start, right? That's rule number one. If you do have a meeting, I want you to think about, okay, what are you doing to start with connection? And I think that a lot of times we get so busy as managers, we travel a lot, or, sometimes you're doing, and a lot of your people are students and they're not always engaged every day in your office. So you got to give yourself a little bit of connection time. So every meeting we do, and we do this for DM staff meetings too, is we cover what we call high, low, and focus. Many of you have probably heard that before, but everybody, it's just a quick round robin, 60 seconds at most. And everybody gets to say, hey, here was my high of the week. That could be personal or professional or both. Here was my low of the week. And then here's my one thing that I'm really focused on doing this next week. And we try to keep that one thing really intentional about the business. And something I've learned about statements, commitments, standards, right, is that they need to be measurable. So the difference between a value statement and a goal statement is what I teach a lot of my people. So we hold each other accountable to that. A value statement is something that's feeling based and typically not measurable, right? A goal statement is something that's measurable and something that you can actually look at the next week and say, all right, here was my one thing. Here's how I did, right? So the focus is kind of accountability from the week before and then intentionality for the week ahead. I've learned that from Front Row Dads, and that's something that John Vroman talked about. He kind of said, hey, maybe your goal is to become a better dad. But if you make that statement and you say, I want to be a better dad, well, a week from now, if I come to you and say, hey, how are you doing with being a better dad? You're going to give me a feeling answer versus a measurable factual answer. So something that you can measure would be saying, I want to be a better dad by getting 1 hour of uninterrupted time with each of my children and my wife over the next week. So a week from now, you could come to me and say, hey, how are you doing with your action step in becoming a better dad? And I could say, hey, I did pretty good. I got 1 hour of uninterrupted time with both kids, but not with the wife, right? And you can kind of see how that would be measurable. So we always start off, and this is probably a 10 to 15 minute exercise. But what I've found is it allows us to come together. It allows us to create connection and gain awareness. And, I've been doing some of the new vector advantage stuff. And one of the quotes or one of the talks we just listened to was Dane Espegard about PPR and productivity manager from SLC. And we did the whole course as a division. And I loved it because one of the things he talked about is the importance of having awareness. I've long told people that I think awareness is 80% of the battle. Action is just the other 20%. Unfortunately, a lot of people take actions without gaining awareness first, and that's what holds them back. So I want to gain awareness of where my people are at, and I want them to gain awareness of where each other is at, because sometimes there might be a death in the family, there might be a problem that they're having, they might have a class that has an issue. So we start with connection. So that's where I begin for the first 10 to 15 minutes. After that, I continue with awareness, and that's where I like to go over a few reports. So 2 of the documents that I uploaded in the chat box, I just uploaded the second one. Sorry about that. I like to start with the state of the business. And this is something I learned from Drew. So we have this document called the Big Four. And this is where I like to make sure that I get it to my staff meetings early. So I'm already on my computer, ready to rock. I don't show up like at the beginning of the staff meeting, let's figure out what to talk about, right? So a day before, I'll look over reports, or that morning, depending on when we run them, I'll go ahead and go on to Vector Connect. I'll go into Vector Live, and I'll pull some specific reports. One of those reports I always like to pull when it comes to Vector Live is I like to pull our advertising stats. And I'll look at our advertising stat report for the week that we just had. I'll also look at the advertising stat report for possibly the month or even the campaign, depending on the season. And just to be clear with that, I always like to look at this, I always like to run staff meetings on Monday mornings. It's a great time to still have one day to impact your sales report with Miracle Monday, and then also to be able to be intentional about what's ahead. So that's when we run Monday morning staff meetings. It can be tricky with school and classes and things like that during the school year, but that's my favorite time. So what we're going to talk about here is the state of the business, right? The Vector Live advertising stats. The second thing I like to look at is hey, how are we doing with our campaign to date report, right? And that's our quantum. So where are we at right now? What week were we up against comparatively this year? And if you're a new manager, you're up against 0. So it's all growth, but you could compare it to somebody else's quantum. Look at a manager that had the $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year or campaign and say, okay, here's how they did it. Let's try to emulate or beat that. And so there's always something I'm comparing to for awareness. So we're looking at our quantum report. We're also looking at our roller report, right? And I'll talk about some of the metrics that I like to look at, but I don't think that the total sales report is as important as the percentage of your team that's on the roller report. For example, I would rather have a sales report of, let's say, $7,000 or $10,000 and have 80 to 90% of my active team with the sale for the week than I would to have this $15,000 week that was made up of a 5K fast starter, 2 3K fast starters, and 2 other reps. Because if that happens, but my team's 2025, what does that tell me? That means 70% of my team didn't even get on the sales report. I'm not cool with that, because what do we know? One of the fastest way to retain people is get them selling, right? Reps that don't sell anything are already 1 step or 1 foot out the door, right? So it's really about awareness and gaining some intentionality with that. So I'm going to do a screen share. You guys can steal this from the chat box. But this is what Drew taught me, and this is what I use as an outline. Please know that this is not like a word for word script. And please know that I also have had people make the mistake of using this and saying, oh, I have to do it all. I don't think that's the goal. In fact, if anything, this would kind of be a roadmap for you the day before, for you to look at the state of your business, to look at, hey, what parts of recruiting do we really need to hone in on right now? What parts of our sales and productivity do we really need to look at? And where is our staff, right? And I'll say the one thing that's not on here, if I were to add a 5th, is schedule. I would even take this line right here under state of the business and make it number 2. And this would become the big 5 that I would start with state of the business. Then I would move into number 2 is schedule, recruiting number 3, sales number 4, and number 5 is staff. By the way, I don't have the doc report of this. This is just the PDF I've stolen from Drew. And so I would have to retype it for that. But culture and energy check, that's part of the connection. Goals, looking at the quantum, looking at the weekly review. What did we expect versus what did we produce? The 4 big numbers. How many PRs did we schedule for the previous week? What was our set for training? And on a Monday, what was our show and launch from training? We look at our overall demos using WebPDI. We're on the virtual, the interactive demo, and that syncs with WebPDI. So it's easy to see. And it's funny, last week, we did like a $7,000 week, and I looked at it, we had 75 demos. So that just made sense of the $100 per demo rule. And then also the newsletter, like what kind of target are we, or what kind of culture are we building around that? When it comes to newsletter, I don't know if you've heard this before, but I like to say, and I think this is even true during school, is that 1K is okay, 2K is good, 3K is great, and 5K is baller status. So I'll say that again, right? 1K is okay, And that doesn't mean that less than 1K is bad. It just means that, in my opinion, if a rep is selling less than $1,000, I'm not sure that rep is okay with committing to this job long-term. Does that make sense? So in my mind, they might have goals that are smaller, but in my mind, if a rep sells 1,000 a week, they feel pretty good about that, right? And I feel like they're going to continue to move forward. So again, 1K is okay, 2K is good, 3K is great, 5K is baller status. So that's kind of the goals and the state of the energy or state of the business. Schedule. This is probably where we spend the next. So I might spend 10 to 15 minutes on, the high, low, and focus. I might spend another 15 minutes on the state of the business, talking about where we are, where we wanted to be, talking about what's ahead, talking about any future events, SLDMs, right? Virtual Sales Summit that's going on right now, SLC, like what's coming ahead. And I like to do the next week in detail and the next month as an overview. So that's kind of how I manage schedule, right? Let's go into schedule, guys, real quick. Everybody bust it out. Let's look at our office schedule that I have on a document. We look over everything. Are there any adjustments we need to make to this? And if you don't have an office schedule about who's running what interview, that means you're really probably going to be reactive as a business owner instead of proactive. So one of the things, I was driving back from campus, we put out like 1,500 flyers at OSU today. One of the things I noticed is lots of students, it was great, but coming back, listening to the Virtual Sales Summit, they just talked about the intentionality when it comes to planning. And when we're most productive as human beings, it's when we are in a routine. So do you have an office schedule with a routine that already has pretty much every interview with who runs the interview, who's the co-host or helper for, doing some additional post interviews, when are phone jams, who's running them, right? Things like that. So again, we review the whole schedule for the week in detail, make sure that every interview is covered. We don't need any changes. We also make sure that, phone jams are in there. We make sure team meeting agenda is planned, right? Do we know what we're talking about? Who's going to give the workshop? Who's going to talk about team builder? Who's going to do opening comments? Who wants to cover recognition? I found that team meetings, as much as I love to do the whole meeting, I'm not helping my people grow if I don't give them some responsibility for that, right? So I try to get as many people on my agenda as possible. And again, workshops and things like that. And then the overview for the next month, right? Events calendar. Hey, are there any events coming up? Let's make sure we know about them. Let's make sure we start driving attendance well in advance. As a new manager, I did this, and I see a lot of my new managers struggle with it too. That they're like, 24 to 48 hours is all they kind of look ahead, and they're like, oh yeah, we've got blank event tomorrow. I need to start driving attendance. It's like, no, that's never going to work. We got to give people at least a week or 2 weeks in advance notice and start driving those attendances and start creating the accountability sheets and signups. So again, covering all that, but this is really 1 and 2, state of the business and schedule, right? Then we move into recruiting. And this is where we'll pull up the ad stats report. We'll go ahead and look over how do we do with PRs. A little bit of recognition, love on your people. Something you might want to write down is catch your people doing things right. It's really easy as a manager to catch our people doing things wrong. And oftentimes we spend so much time trying to correct or trying to, make sure that we reprimand privately and recognize publicly, but we're still not that good at it, right? So what can you do to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of love when it comes to their recruiting? I've got, a new AM right now that possibly was going to be training as a pilot. And yesterday made a mistake, slept in, missed out on some of our campus work, and was really disappointed. Was like, I don't know if I can be a leader. I feel so bad. I let you down again. And I had to just give her the permission to say, hey, you're human. Like even great people make bad decisions. Even great people make mistakes. So this doesn't make you a bad human. This just makes you human. And here's the deal. It's not about what happened. It's about what you're going to do to make up for it. And anytime something doesn't get done that I feel like needs to, it's always, hey, what are you going to do to make up for it? Instead of being emotional and feeling and all this stuff, making a bigger deal than it really needs to be, hey, what are you going to do to make up for it? So we look through things like, hey, who booked their 5 for last week, right? Who had the highest show percentages? Sometimes I'll do what we call tips from the top. So if somebody's in the lead of scheduling number or show percentage, or somebody got a really good show to training that's running interviews, I'll just ask them, hey, real quick, Kathy, can you share for 2 minutes on what you feel like got you to go from a 40% show 2 weeks ago to now having a 57% show last week? I mean, I'm really fired up about that. And I would love to learn because clearly something changed. Like, I don't think that's luck that got you a 15% increase in 1 week. You didn't run more interviews or different interviews, right? You might have had different people, but we all do every week. So what do you think happened? Right. And she might say, well, I role played my script, or actually I took some time and I watched your interview and then I noticed that you do blank and blank. Those types of things can help, right? Looking forward to campus. Do we have campus on the schedule every week, whether it's flyering, updating some posters, sending out some emails, or just doing a career fair or some tabling? And again, I just think it's so important to realize this is not a, hey, you're going to spend, maybe 15, 20 minutes on schedule, and then I have to go through every part of these. No, I'm going to pick probably 2 or 3 of these. And I'm going to make sure that we highlight those, right? What were the ways we were winning last week? And what's 1 to 2 areas of improvement? Maybe it's efficiency. Maybe it's show to training. Maybe it's driving more touches. So this is like kind of more of a menu. And this is why it takes a little bit of intentionality the day before to look over it and say, okay, based on where my business is at, what do I need to take from this and highlight for my staff? And that's why I would never like do a screen share like I'm doing right now with my staff during a staff meeting and say, okay, the next item on the list is that's not going to work, right? So we're going to go through this. Okay. So after I do recruiting, we always want to make sure we talk about, hey, what's our set for training on a Monday? What do we think we can get that to? And how are we going to do it? Do we need to maybe add some more interviews? Like today we put out 1,500 flyers. I already know that tomorrow is going to be stacked. And so I went into Vector Live and increased the caps on our interviews so we could get more people to sign up for those over the next 2 days. All right. The last couple of things, sales. I'm going to teach you a really cool concept with that. This is a big one though. Hey, how did our training group do? And remember that 50% of our PPR comes during the fast start, and more than 50% of that comes from the first weekend. So how many did we launch? How are they doing so far in the first 24 to 48 hours? And what conversations need to be had to make sure we can get them to pop on a Miracle Monday and drive attendance to advanced training 1 on Tuesday? And your schedule might be different, but really, really honing in on who are our new leaders. And I'm a firm believer in this, and this might be a little bit different of a talk than what Kathy wanted. But guys, if you think about the fall campaign, there's still 15 weeks left. Now you might run on training every one of those weeks, but I would say in an average campaign, we probably run training 14 to 15 weeks out of the 17 or 18 there are. So if you can get one person to average a 5K fast start, just one every week on average. Now, some might do 7 or 10, some might fail and do 3, but I'll put it this way. If we can get one to average 5K, even if that one person never sells Cutco again, you're automatically creating 15 5K people. That's a $75,000 new business campaign. And that's assuming they never quit again. I don't think any one of our managers is ever too busy to pick one person to put time and energy into to drive them to get 2 to 3 demos a day for their first 10 days. And if you're sitting here saying, well, I don't think I have that one person, then we need to really think about how can we get that one person into training every week. And by the way, Lloyd's promoted it for a long time, like feeding the kids. You sign 2 sharp people a day, 5 days a week, you got 10 sharpies set for training. It's difficult to not launch one. So again, how can you think a little bit bigger? Sometimes we think quantity is what we need. And I really believe that you can get a lot out of quality. And if you just commit to one person, Alex Mazurek taught me this. He said, this isn't your fast start. This is my fast start. Spencer, I wish I could do my fast start all over again, but I can't. So here's the deal. If I could, let me teach you what I made mistakes on and how I could do better. And here's the deal. I'm never going to get my fast start back, but you still have yours ahead of you. So if you don't mind, I'd love to be a tough coach. Do I have your permission to be a tough coach on you? You're my one person I'm choosing this week, and I want to make sure that we maximize your fast start. You may, by the way, get to 5K. You may get to 10. You may do more than that. Doesn't really matter to me. I just want you to know you're my person this week, and I'm going to commit to you if you can commit to this. What do you think? And if you can have that quality conversations, probably a little bit more script, a little bit more lengthy, that one person becomes your project. And no matter what, you find a way with that one person to link arms, right? And get them to their goals. And if you can do that, one person a week, that's not to say you forget about everybody else. Think about where they can attack you. And I think that we all know the power of rabbits. We all know the power of rabbits. By the way, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'll say it on recording. I did not have a 10K fast starter in all of COVID. My last 10K fast starter was in 2019 until this year when I decided to get back in person. And for whatever reason, by the way, I knew that this summer was going to be a win because we needed a rabbit. So I got one guy that goes to OSU as a sophomore, by the way, had an 11K fast start. The week after that, I had a 15K fast starter. The week after that, I had a 15.5 fast starter. And after that, didn't have another fast starter for the summer, but I got 3 in a row once I got what? 1. Some of you might be behind on your P-Banquet goals right now, or behind on trying to win the kicker from Madrid. Hey, all it takes is what? 1. You get this culture going of 1 person, and pretty soon you start to build it big. And that 1 person is probably going to be a future AMIT and a future attendee at your staff meeting. It's kind of fun. Okay, 4 quadrants. I can cover that if you need. That's more of a Drew type of exercise where we look at the team. This is something you wouldn't do during the staff meeting, you do before the staff meeting. Anybody that's active on your team, breaking it down and saying, okay, I'm going to write them into 1 of 4 columns. The first column is going to be, right, goose eggs. Who is a 0 for the week on a Monday? Yikes. This is a scary place to be because I'm probably going to lose them. Who is between 1 and 500? Who is between 500 and 1,000? And who is between over 1,000 and up? And I write everybody's name in there so we can really start to gain awareness of, hey, how's our team doing? What percentage is over 1,000 in the middle and at the bottom? And if you need to, you can go rep by rep, right? This is, again, more of a menu, but you can pick a topic, pick 2 topics that you feel like really need to be covered. And the last thing is I like to make sure that my staff makes commitments. So this is where I review the triple threat program, which is, hey, are we selling 10K every campaign? Are we booking 50 PRs throughout the course of a campaign? And are we, right, making sure that we get 5 friends on the team throughout a campaign? Because that way they're part of the Team Builder Scholarship. They might not win, but at least they're competing. And that's the triple threat program. And then it's about making commitments for the next week. Hey, what's your sales goal, right? What's your PR goal? And hey, can you 3-way text 5 of your friends that we can now do through the app, which is pretty cool. And I'll be the first to tell you I'm not perfect. I don't get all of this done, but that's kind of the outline and the agenda that's really worked well for us. And the last thing that I'll teach you is the 5 layers of a sales report. This is something that I made prior to COVID, and I really, really like it. It's something that I think forces managers to think a little bit bigger about their business. And this is something that if we have time in a staff meeting, we'll spend the last 10 to 15 minutes doing. If not, I make sure it's always done. And my managers screenshot this and post it to our division group me on a Tuesday. And it's just a great accountability system. So I found that a sales report is made up of 5 main categories or layers. Don't worry, none of these layers are CSP. They're all new business. Creating individual sales goals for each layer helps you think about a bigger overall goal. So use this exercise to develop your office goal at your next staff meeting by looking through last week's roller report and creating layer goals. So I've got room for 10 AMs, but putting each AM's name on here and having conversations about what you think they can sell or what they think they can sell. Also, how many new AMITs do you want to promote by next week? And what is your total AM sales goal for the week? Fast start, right? First 3 days. How many do I want to launch next week? And what's my PPR? I think about even if you're sitting here with 3 AMs and each AM can do 500 a piece, that's a $1,500 goal. Okay, if I can launch 5 people at 500 first weekend, I know we could get bigger than that, but that's another 2,500. Now I'm already at $4,000 out of 2 layers. Now you might not have launched somebody 2 weeks ago, but eventually you will. And if you get that layer, now you have second week fast starters. Who is your, right, target 1 and target 2? And how many are still active? Sometimes they quit in their first 3 days. And what is that PPR goal? And what do you think we can do? Now, if we can get 2,500 here, 2,500 here, 1,500 here, now we're looking at 6,500. And then you start to look at, okay, how about my key staff? Can I get a key staff member to commit to 100 calls a week, 5 demos a week, and sell $1,000? You know, in my opinion, that's more of a key staff type of person during the school year. And the last thing is a current team. No goose eggs. Can you get some sales out of the other people? And I think that even if you just get another couple thousand here and $1,000 here, you're now looking at an overall $10,000 sales goal. But I think that as much as we all know, like, hey, it'd be great if I was selling 10K every week, 10K doesn't come because you just wanted it. 10K comes because you're intentional about, okay, how much is going to come from this layer, second layer, third layer, and so on. So that's kind of the last exercise that we do. And then what I found is it's really good to use the last 5 minutes to do round robins, where it's like, hey, what's our biggest takeaway? What did we learn from today? Or do a little bit of open Q&A where it's like, great, well, guys, thanks so much for an awesome staff meeting. If you're good, we've got 5 minutes left. You're ready to roll. If you're not good, let's go ahead and use the last 5 minutes to go ahead and just open it up for any concerns, any questions. It's kind of like office hours if you're a teacher. So hopefully that helps out, Kathy. I'd be happy to email those documents if you can't download them in the chat box so you have them. But I think that kind of system of an hour and a half, 90 minutes has really worked effectively for us.
I love it. While we have him on, any quick questions for Nick? This was great.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, so much. I love the values of feeling a goal is like measurable, right? I feel like especially after SC2 for a lot of our assistant managers, they're like $200,000, like that sounds cool. You know, it's Joseph Rodriguez and just seeing all these like 20, 30, 40K pushers, and it's exciting. And then they go to school and they're like, I can't even do, I mean, 5 demos. I'm kind of stretching it, right? So really bringing like, it's exciting to have that goal, right? And that feeling of like, I want to sell a lot, but not like, you know, if they sell $750 like a week, but they were consistent with stuff, they showed up, they got the schoolwork done, like feeling good about that, like feeling good, kind of like intertwined, like feeling good about having a measurable goal and making sure that they know it's different, right? Than the summer. I love that. I love take awareness before taking action. I love how you start off with just kind of like a round robin type of thing. I think that's really cool. Kind of gets people talking. Sometimes I feel like in staff meetings, it's like, y'all have any questions? And they're just like, you know, they don't always say anything. So I really appreciate that. And I like what do you feel like you're doing well? So do you ever prep, like, let's say you're looking at the numbers, right? You're prepping for your staff meeting. Do you like, okay, hey, Maddie, you did a great job with your show, right? Do you kind of prep her at all? Or like, do you kind of just throw her on the spot? Like, yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, great question. I think it's if you feel like they really have a lot of value to deliver, then yeah, hey, I'd like you, John, to give a 5-minute message tomorrow to a staff meeting. However, I've found that oftentimes you get the most authentic, real answer when you don't prep somebody, right? Like when you just kind of like let them go based on what's in their heart. And again, if you're only asking them to talk for 1 or 2 minutes, sometimes they might say, you know, I really don't know what happened. And say, all right, well, if you did know, what's one thing that might be right, something that's changed, and maybe it didn't change this week, but it's something you've been thinking of over the last month. So oftentimes just offering a little bit more leading questions there. But yeah, having a system that you can follow that it covers the big four, right? The big four that I talk about is, you know, the state of the business and the schedule. We also need to cover recruiting. We need to cover productivity, and we need to cover development. And on the staff part of that last part, we always like to look at our development list. Hey, who is developing? Who's somebody that we would like to have join our staff, or we feel like we should be having an AMIT combo with? And I will say one last little bonus tip, by the way. I've found my business is the best when I'm having 4 specific intentional PCs every week. So the first PC I like to have is a 10K fast starter PC right after the first week. And I already talked about the power of one. The second one I like to have every week is making sure that I have a Dirty 30 PC. Who's somebody that just wrapped up their fast start, and how do I get them committed to joining our Dirty 30 league and getting the 10K for the campaign? The third one I like to have is I like to have an AMIT conversation. Who's somebody that I see on our team that I'd like to promote to an AMIT role? And the fourth one I like to have is a team builder one. And this is somebody who's really well connected, or somebody who gave me a ton of PRs, but maybe we haven't booked a bunch of them yet. And we want to be very intentional about them winning some PR prizes and joining the scholarship race. So, you know, if you look over your team and you say, okay, who's the one person I can put into each one of those types of PCs? I feel like you're really going to hit hard on a lot of those layers.
Sometimes maybe it's both, like, right? Like, do you have like a blend, like your guy who just wrapped up their fast start is also kind of like your AM one. And I really like that.
A lot of my layers will end up being a part of all 4 at some point, but I try to make sure there's a different person for each one of those every week. So,
love that. And then last question: anytime you have like, let's say a rep who, you know, like they're not kind of maximizing their potential, right? Do you kind of have like a 2-week, like, hey, we had a goose egg week, right? Like, what's kind of your accountability process with a rep that you feel like isn't maximizing their full potential?
Well, I think the first thing I always try to start with is curiosity versus criticism. So always checking in, you know, from a place of curiosity. Hey, Cody, been a while, man. How you feeling? Right? How's life? How's school? How's everything going? Okay, cool. Well, hey, just wanted to reach out. I know we haven't connected in a few days, and I've noticed that you know, you're pretty consistent there for a while, and then you've fallen off a little bit. Everything okay? Right? It's not like you. And I'm always coming from a place of curiosity. And I think that if you just really dig into asking more questions first, you'll figure out what's going on. Then you can be a little bit more empathetic, right? Meet them where they're at. And then you can start to talk about like, hey, what can I do to help you? Right. You know, I think our job as a manager, Kevin Barth taught me this. He said, is to just help people get unstuck. That's our job. People naturally are going to get stuck as human beings, whether it's personal, professional, financial, like that just happens. And oftentimes we're not as stuck as we feel, right? So I always like to tell people that it's never as good as you want it to be, but it's also never as bad as it seems. So let's just realize that like you're not as stuck as you might feel. And let's talk about what we can do to get unstuck, right? What are some things we can do, right? Because the brain wants to automatically always go to what things we can't do. But if we can stay focused on what we can do, that's going to help us get unstuck and just keep moving forward. And I've run a lot of marathons, and something I learned, I think from John Berghoff or gosh, like Trent Booth, was just, if I just keep moving, I'll keep going. Maybe it's Hal Elrod. I don't know. I always get distracted with who taught me what, but if I just keep moving, I'll keep going. And I've never run 26 miles without stopping, or without walking at some point, but I've also never run a marathon and stopped, right? Unless I had to go to the bathroom. But other than that, I'm always moving forward. I'm always continuing to put one foot in front of the other. So that can really help people get unstuck and move forward.
Love that.
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of times it's just getting them into action, right? The only way to get over nerves, the only way to get over feelings and frustrations is action. So what are we doing to just get them back in action? Right? That's the bottom line. Like, hey, it hasn't been what you wanted. We've had a couple of tough weeks, but here's the good news. You know how to do the job. You've already learned it all. So let's just get back in action, man. Right? Like, what do you think you can do today, Cody, to go ahead and make a few calls? Right? Let's figure out who our top 10 are. Let's go ahead and double tap them. Call me back. Let me know how they go. Right? What's your schedule look like for the rest of the day? Probably take you 30 minutes or less. So when can you plan that in? All right, perfect. So you're going to call me by 7 o'clock when it should be done, letting me know how it went, or call me by 7 o'clock, let me know you didn't do it. Either way, we're talking to 7. Sound good? I expect that call by 7, Cody. Anyway, so hopefully that answers what you got, John.
Thank you, Nick.
Any other things you wanted, Kathy, before we wrap?
Just wanted to, if anyone else had any other questions. I mean, I know there's tons of takeaways for sure. Anything you want clarity on, anybody? And if not, you can just praise Mr. Nick. Or you guys can put in the chat box actually what was most helpful for you. I mean, I think that's good for all of us as leaders, as we're growing, as we're teaching others, to know what are the things, because sometimes we get an autopilot and some things that might seem very like normal and simple, we're reminded that that might not be the case for everybody, right? And might be good reminders for everybody to bring them to where we want them to be. So yeah, any other things you guys want to share here, or any other questions before we wrap up?
You guys are all more than welcome